Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Max, and I'll be your host. We are delighted to have our wonderful sponsor, Quintype, with us today, who will be presenting this webinar titled, How the Boston Globe Found a Future for Local Journalism. Let me introduce our esteemed guest speakers for today. Chad Hussain, VP of International Partnerships for Quintype, Dominic Ponsford, Editor-in-Chief for Press Gazette, and Kyron Salmanpour, Chief Commercial Officer for Boston Globe Media. Now I'll provide some housekeeping information before we start. First of all, I'd like to welcome you to our webinar platform, ON24. You'll notice that this webinar is browser-based, so if you disconnect for any reason, please just click on the link that you received via your email to rejoin the session. During today's event, there will be plenty of time to ask questions to our speakers. You can do that via the questions widget. Just type your question in this box and click submit. We will allocate some time at the end of the session to answer any questions or any thoughts that you may have. If you require any assistance, please use the yellow help widget, and you can move, resize, and maximize any of the windows in front of you to get a better view of the slides. But for now, please allow me to welcome our speakers. Over to you.
Thank you, Max. Hello, everyone, and welcome, Kayvan. Hi, Kayvan.
Hi, Dominic. How you doing?
Great to have you on from Boston, USA, and hi, Chad. Welcome, Chad.
Hi, Dominic. How are you?
Brilliant. And Chad, you're over in Austin, Texas. Is that correct?
I'm in Austin at the moment. Yeah.
Amazing. The age we live in. I'm in the UK. So the topic of the day is really the future of local news. And I think anyone who's been involved in journalism for any length of time, this is a topic that's really close to their hearts, because local news is where the news begins. It's where the news gathering happens. It's the foundation of the whole industry. And really, since 2008, those foundations have looked pretty shaky. So we're so pleased to have you on, Kayvan, Chief Commercial Officer of the Boston Globe. We're going to focus on you to begin with, and then we'll hear a bit more from Chad to get some international perspectives from him. But before we dive into the discussion, we'll just do a quick introduction, if you wouldn't mind, and just give us your who you are and what you do, what the job entails. So we'll start with you, Kayvan.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Chief Commercial Officer for our Boston Globe Media Partners and Executive Vice President for Boston.com. I've been in the media industry for 22 years, primarily focusing on trying to find new ways to monetize high quality journalism. I've worked everywhere from companies like NewsCred, which was a large content marketing company, to Hearst, to the business of fashion. And I've been at the Globe for 6 years. Essentially, I run all things revenue for the Globe. I focus on everything from advertising to events to strategic partnerships. And it's been a great ride so far.
Fantastic. And you still got all your hair and not so grey, which is rare for a media executive. It's fantastic.
I know it's actually all grey, Dominic, but it's still there.
Brilliant. And Chad, do you want to just give us a quick hello?
Yeah, I'm the VP of International Partnerships with Quintype. We're a publisher technology company, so we're essentially interested in your product, the CMS, your reader revenue platform, your front end, everything that you would consider as your actual product. I've been in publishing literally all my life. I've, I suppose, been on the commercial side. I've been a publisher. And the last 10 years, I've been involved in publisher technology. I'm based in Dubai. I work for an Indian company. I spend my time majority in the US, and I'm British. So I kind of travel around the world speaking to an awful lot of publishers in different places. And there's a lot of universal commonalities amongst their challenges, I can say that.
Okay, brilliant. We'll come on to those later on. But first with you, Kayvan. So So the Globe, I mean, we've all we've all heard of it. It's one of the most famous news titles in the world, isn't it? More Pulitzer prizes that you can shake a stick at. But in 2008, well, post 2008, after the financial crash, like a lot of titles, the future looked very, very uncertain, didn't it? And it feels now like one of the few sort of big local titles that's really made a good solid, print to digital transition. And maybe you can give us maybe some of the numbers later on, but can you just tell us a little bit about how you've done it, how the Boston Globe has sort of made that transition from very, very dicey times, 2009, to a business that looks like it's growing now and looks like it's got some confidence.
Yeah. So in 2009, it wasn't in a great place. So back then, I don't know if you remember, the New York Times still owned the Globe. It famously bought the Globe for just over $1 billion in 1993. And it was losing a lot of its audience to the web. Advertising was declining. Google was eating the classifieds business, and Facebook was eating its SMB advertising business. And it sort of got to revenue was declining, and it got to this stage where a lot of important decisions needed to get made. I would say, Dominic, the first important decision was separating Boston.com from the Globe. So this idea of a two-brand strategy. One would be free, and the other one would be a premium paid reader revenue focused site, which was Globe.com. And when John and Linda Henry bought the Globe in 2013, and we should at one point touch on the importance of local ownership, because I think it really makes a difference. They were adamant that the Globe should, its future is going to be focused on being a reader revenue premium site. So that actually propelled us to charge an even premium rate at that time. So it was $3.99 a week. And when John and Linda joined, we increased the price to $1 a day, which was pretty bold at the time, and also quite scary. We modeled out that we would probably lose about 20 to 40% of our subscribers, but we wanted to be revenue maximizing as much as possible. What was encouraging is that when we initiated that price change, which is a 72% price increase, we only lost 3% of subscribers when the price changed. And that really put us in very, very solid footing. I would say the second biggest decision, Dominic, was in 2018 when volumes stopped growing. We asked ourselves, what would it be like to have national scale in our regions? And what would it be like for us to increase the top of the funnel? So we started testing a lot of different trial offers, and where we landed in our testing was $1 for 6 months. And we have a VP of Consumer Marketing, Tom Brown, and this huge credit goes to him as he was working on these strategies. And when we implemented the $1 for 6 months in the fall of 2018, what we noticed was a 10x conversion rate for subscriptions, which was really, really encouraging. What we didn't know is how they were going to act off at the end of that 6 months. But the positive signs were that they were engaging with the content as much as those that were a pre-trial offer. And that felt really engaged. It felt counterintuitive, but what we realized is that people want to pay for the content, but they may not want to pay $30 off the bat. And so once we saw that engagement and it came to the 6 month, the end of the 6 month trial period, we noticed that the first and second full price payment, we saw a significant drop. By the third, fourth, and fifth full price payment, we noticed that the retention rate went back to what it was pre-trial offer. So that was the big aha moment for us, Dominic, was, wow, we can get 10x the conversion rate, but with the same retention rate as before. And that really put us in absolute solid footing. So honestly, when spring 2020 came around, and we saw traffic through the roof, we weren't second guessing ourselves with the trial offer. And that's when we saw a real growth in subscriptions. Now, it was at the time, a lot of local media companies put their paywall down, and there was a lot of internal, external conversations around whether we should, but we felt strong enough that Boston.com was providing free COVID content, and so was Stat, which is our B2B media company covering life sciences. So we kept the trial as is, and I think, in hindsight, a lot of other local media companies mentioned to us that they wish that they kept the paywall up during COVID, but we saw a tremendous amount of growth after that. So, and we still have that offer now, but that was the two big decisions at that time, Dominic, that changed the game for us.
And discounting is can be a bit of a touchy subject with publishers, because I think sometimes it's like you say, you get the conversion, but you don't always keep them. And then I think there's also a kind of game that goes on, isn't there, where people cancel and then the publisher comes back and says, "Oh, well, you come back for $1," and then there's always a concern that maybe your loyal customers could feel a little bit hard done by there. So how do you approach that? Do you sort of once they've had the 6 months for $1, are you fairly have a fairly hard and fast rule on, well, now it's full price?
Yeah, so I think two parts to that. I think part one is the mindset of us saying, take a chance on us and sample our content. And we hope that you like the quality of the content as much as possible. We're obviously a general news site, so the breadth and depth of our content is quite important. People may come in by reading an investigations, but what we notice is that they migrate onto other verticals that are not as high converting, so arts, lifestyle, and sports. But you're right, Dominic, is that there's a tremendous amount of hop on, hop off behavior, as you see with streaming companies. And actually, 30% of our new subscribers are former subscribers. So it's sort of on us to figure out how to be best in class to make sure that we're keeping their profiles, their avatars, all their previous recommendations, so that when they do come back on, it's a very seamless process and it feels like we're welcoming them back rather than treating them as someone new.
And so what's the and I don't know whether you'd divulge this, so forgive me, but what are the numbers looking like now? I think the last time I checked, you were about 50,000 print and 200,000 some digital, but probably.
So we're 265,000 digital subscribers and 75,000 print subscribers.
Congratulations. It's good. And the what? And I know you're not on editorial, but can you say anything about the way the content has sort of changed, or the sort of content you found subscribers like? Because I feel that when you go down this paid for road, it leads to a very different type of content than you will see in a free site. And certainly in the UK with free local news websites, they often have to produce a high quantity of stories and delve off into different areas, probably not so core local areas, in order to get the page views up to hit the advertising numbers. So did it have a much of an impact on content? And can you say sort of what the type of content you found that subscribers like?
So I think it's very nuanced. I mean, I definitely can't speak for the newsroom. What I could say is that the product is extremely high quality and the journalism is second to none. And I feel that that in a lot of ways speaks for itself in terms of how it's driven subscribers and how it's retained subscribers. We focus a lot less on it's nuanced because all content has the potential to convert. What's actually more telling, Dominic, is the attribute of the potential subscriber. So, geography, location, browser, time of day. That tells us a lot more about the ability for them to subscribe than content. So there are areas that drive more subscriptions than others, like investigations, sports, even niche areas like high school sports. But we are, as I mentioned before, like we're a general news site, and what we notice is that what people come in for one thing definitely start consuming 4 or 5 other areas that may not be as high converting. And I think it's that all things to all people approach that's helped us a lot.
And what are the other important revenue lines for the Globe now? So you've got subscriptions, fantastic. What are the other things? Obviously, advertising, and I know you do a lot of events, and you're moving more into broadcasting as well.
Yeah. So lines of revenue are subscriptions, obviously digital and print, then advertising, then events. We have some publication revenue as well, because we own our own printing facility and we produce and distribute for other papers as well. I would say on the digital side, that's our biggest potential for growth, and we're thinking about everything from, as I mentioned, former subscribers to family plans to bundling to paywall strategies. On the advertising side, and I could talk about this later, but we've founded a few new media companies incubated within the Globe to go after new audiences that are specifically around social video. Another revenue stream, Dominic, has been licensing. So we have these large tent poles, like Top Places to Work. These tent poles center around lists. So lists of surveys around the best cultures in Boston to work in. And what we do, these are big ticket items for us. We sell advertising, events, sponsored tables, tickets. But what we also do is sell logos. So companies have the ability to license their logo to put on their site, which we actually sell to HR rather than marketing. And we've done this for a number of tentpoles, and it's been really fruitful for us. As you mentioned, broadcasting. So we launched Boston Globe today as a show to meet people where they are, whether it's on linear, on social, on video. And that's proved very well to amplify our journalism. And we have IP as well, Dominic. So when we this is quite opportunistic, but when you have a big investigative hit, it could prove a lucrative source of revenue. We did a podcast called Gladiator with Aaron Hernandez, produced by in association with Wondery. I think it has about 8 million downloads now. It was a great podcast. It started as an article, then it went to a podcast, and then we sold the rights to FX for a TV series. And I think IP has proved to be a really good revenue stream for us as well.
The film Spotlight, of course. Well, I don't know whether you guys made money out of that, but obviously it was a great, fantastic story. We're getting lots of questions coming in, so that's great. We'll keep them coming, and we'll get to all the questions. We'll leave time for the questions at the end. Just on the advertising. So the advertising's been a pretty torrid area for a lot of publishers over the last 18 months. Really, as the kind of the online advertising ecosystem hasn't favoured us. It feels like revenue's gone to social media. It's gone to YouTube, and it's sort of flowed away from publishers. And I guess there's all sorts of challenges around programmatic yields getting lower and cookie deprecation, all the rest of it. So I mean, how have you guys dealt with that side of things?
Yeah. So when I joined 6 years ago, there was a consistent year-over-year decline in advertising. One of the first things I did was an audit of the advertising business. And what we quickly realized is actually 45% of our clients only accounted for 8% of revenue. So tiny, tiny deals, whether it was print or digital, mostly print. And about 50% of our revenue came from deals over 75K. So actually, the way I looked at the ad business was through deal sizes and separated it into 3 tiers. Deals over 75K, anything between 15K and 75K, and anything underneath 15K. And so that allowed me to look at the business through the lens of talent and product. So to get more deals over 75K, we needed much more sophisticated agency and content sellers to do multimedia programs that we could pitch directly to advertisers. And we teamed up with Fenway Sports, which is owned by Linda and John Henry, properties like Red Sox, to create scale and co-pitch for these deals. And we ended up closing a lot more deals over 75K. The mid-tier deal size, which is sort of your repeatable, high-performing, direct digital ad deals, we needed to work a lot closely with the newsroom in order to get the best out of those products. So what I actually did at the time, which was novel at the time, was hire what we called a GM of editorial initiative. So this was a former journalist, and it usually has to be a former journalist who's interested in the business side of the media. And their role is to bridge the gap between advertising and the newsroom. So their role is to lead coordination efforts between newsroom, sales marketing, help on the design of ad units, make sure that upcoming newsroom projects are created in a way that a sponsor might be interested. They work on the editorial calendar. It's a very nuanced role. They have to be extremely trustworthy, which is why I say like a former journalist. They don't work on commissions. They're very mission orientated. And that really changed the game for us. Like we increased newsletter revenue year over year. We increased events revenue, which most of our journalists are on these events. And that was a big change for us in that mid-tier. And then the final tier, anything under 10K, we teamed up with a self-serve platform to mimic buying off of Google and Facebook, so sponsored listings. And I think that machine has helped us a lot weather the storm with advertising. Oh, and the last thing I would say, Dominic, is we have strategically aligned ourselves with industries, valuable industries within Boston, and almost had a B2B media approach to it. So healthcare is a perfect example. Boston's a big healthcare region. We designed a lot of programs, video series, newsletters around the healthcare community in Boston. We've nurtured healthcare audiences as a result. And we sort of position ourselves in the same way Washington Post do for politics and Wall Street Journal does for business. We're trying to do the same for healthcare, and it's attracted a lot of farmer advertising as well.
So you have sort of sales people that got good relationships with local businesses who are knocking on doors and kind of direct selling. Is that a big part of it?
Well, it's more on the, so we sell to media agencies and we try and sell to brands direct. And then I think anything on the SMB side, we try and create more of a SaaS approach where we're doing lead gen via email, but it's the old days of knocking on doors with a media kit are long gone, Dominic.
Showing my age. Brilliant. Look, I got one more for you, Kayvan, and then I'm going to bring Chad in. So another big theme, I think, in the UK and the US is sort of Gen Z, or Gen Z, as you might call them. I don't know. The real challenge is that they seem to consume news they definitely consume news in a very different way from previous generations. So they don't certainly in the UK, if you speak to a bunch of graduate students, they're not reading the Guardian, they're not reading the Times, they're not, they're reading Twitter and TikTok, and they're sort of they're finding the news, but in a very different way, which isn't necessarily helpful for publishers who'd rather they were on the website. So, I mean, is that challenge you guys are finding? And are you? I guess there's two approaches, aren't there? You can say, well, hopefully they'll grow up into good, honest news consumers in the future, and we'll just wait for them to come to us, or you can sort of go to them where they are. But I don't know. What's your approach?
Yeah, we had tremendous success the last couple of years with a media company we incubated within the innovation and ad team called B-Side. So B-Side was conceived as a mobile-first, creator-driven native newsletter where we don't link back to the paywall. It's a native newsletter and it's very social video focused. So the issue that we had, Dominic, was younger audiences, certain consumer brands that didn't want to advertise with the traditional Globe, and we weren't very good at social video. At the same time, what we realized is that Boston's a big college town. It has 150,000 college students in the region. So when we created B-Side, it was focused on Gen Z and millennials, covering local news and things to do. It's very, very personality driven. So we found a great creator who's now on staff. We launched it 2 years ago. We have 120,000 subscribers. 65% of the audience is under the age of 35. And it's become an incredible cult hit. We have brands like DoorDash and Toast, who are our advertisers. And because of the growth that we've had, we've just launched B-Side Sports, which is basically the same take. It's creator driven. It's actually focused on sports culture and athlete driven content. We just launched a podcast with Tom Brady's social media agent production company. And it's the same approach. It's optimistic, it's positive, it's ad friendly, it's accessible. But these things are really hard to do. You have to get the tone right, you have to get the right creator, and you have to get that right mix between local news and it hitting the sort of like the cultural zeitgeist as well.
And I guess it feels like that probably tackles the associate issue of like news avoidance as well, isn't it? That a lot of people kind of avoid the news for understandable reasons, don't they? Because it can get a bit grim. So you're sort of getting that mix.
Exactly. So perfectly, like, you know, we did a TikTok on the MBTA, the T train breaking down, which is sort of like notorious in Boston for going through a bunch of different refurbishments all the time, and it was like it was a fun, comical way of looking of how to get from A to B without taking this train. And so we do fun takes on hard local news. Awesome.
Thanks, Kayvan. Listen, I'm going to bring Chad in now. Let you take a quick breather, and then we'll come back to you. We've got a bunch of audience questions coming in. So, Chad, I mean, does the what you're hearing from Kayvan, does that resonate with what you're seeing working in other markets? I know you guys are across India and particularly and other areas. I mean, what are you finding that's working in terms of bringing in revenue for local publishers in other parts of the world and kind of keeping the show on the road?
It's all the same. It's interesting listening to Kayvan speak. But yeah, you know, I suppose our origin is majority in Asia and across the Middle East and Europe. But yeah, the news challenges are global. We're seeing advertising as being flat at best. Some offerings are better than others, but by and large, most of the publishers that we are, you know, speaking to, they're in single-digit decline in their kind of ad model. Simultaneously, though, Dominic, their audiences are growing, so they're getting bigger audiences, and that's not translating into a commercial gain for them or a revenue gain. So there is a shift generally in Asia, and it's been accelerating extremely quickly. It's quite slow to start, but it's been moving to a different business model, a more reliable business model. And that leads virtually everything to reader revenue. And, you know, I kind of make that distinction between reader revenue and subscription. They all want subscription, but really subscription is just part of a narrative where they're looking to a direct-to-consumer business model, where they're wanting to get some revenue from their readership to pay for that content. If it comes in the form of a subscription, great. But I think most of them can forecast what that's going to look like. So, and it's quite hard to acquire. So, at the moment, all the parallels that have been mentioned are certainly true in Asia, and they're all shifting. I think they're behind the curve. When you look at the US, you look at some pioneers. When you look at Asia, they're a little bit behind.
So, I mean, one thing that struck me from what Keyvan said was this decision that was made very early on to charge for content, keep the quality high, which I think probably stopped the Globe going down some dead ends that I think other publishers went down in the sort of 2010s when they chased scale and they chased advertising, and they maybe strayed a little bit about what made them special in the first place as local publishers. And I just wonder what's the I imagine there's certainly in the UK and elsewhere, there's a lot of publishers now that are looking at their websites and looking at their content and thinking, well, how do we charge for this? Because we've never charged for it before, and is it worth paying for? But what's what are the sort of technical and cultural and sort of maybe even content changes that people need to make if they want to sort of get on that road towards a more reader revenue focused model?
Yeah, it's interesting, and some of the things Keyvan mentioned we're also kind of paralleling here. But the way that you tell a story is become very important. If you're going to pursue a reader revenue model, the way that you're telling that story is really about optimizing for engagement, and you're not optimizing for pure performance. So if you put on another 100,000 page views, it doesn't necessarily translate into developing a better reader revenue model. So publishers are increasingly creating content for a digitally native reader. Somebody was mentioning this to me the other day, and it kind of blew my mind a little bit that, the oldest millennials are over 40, Gen Z is coming up to 20, so in a hop, skip, and a jump, people who are purely native on digital are going to be your potential readers, And what that looks like is it's fast loading, it's multimedia, it's mobile first, it's live, it's breaking. It's content that can be bite-sized in the morning, and then it could be immersive in the afternoon. Let me give you an example that I think that's quite telling from Asia. Well, it's not necessarily Asia; it's around the world, actually. So, 2024 is a strange year when it comes to elections because it's the biggest number of people ever in humanity have ever been eligible to vote. 4 billion people in 2024 are eligible to vote. And that means there's an awful lot of data floating around, for people to report on, whether it's a very local election, it's a national election. In India, for example, they've just had their national election. Nearly 1 billion people are eligible to vote. Now, what that looks like is you can start visualizing this data using companies like DataWrapper, Flourish, Google Data Studio, and very simply, you can start bringing your content to life. And you can just literally embed that into your story. And now election tracking is real time. It's immersive, it's efficient, it's mobile first, it's visual first, it's visual storytelling. And that's the difference. When you look back a few years, it'd be like, let's just get the numbers out, or let's just spend half an hour and visualizing this data. And that means visual data stories suddenly makes news ubiquitous. You could be in a meeting and just say, listen, I'm checking on this story. Or you could be on a train and say, I'm just going to check on this story and see what's happening in the local election. And that's made a big difference across Asia because they've adopted that really, really well.
I feel like this idea of making your website, the content a lot richer and a lot more immersive in different ways, it's maybe even more, more detailed, more is a good one, isn't it? When you think that the facts are now being relayed by sort of Google AI overviews, by Perplexity, by what's the new one? Search GPT. So the AI engines are reading our content now, and they're relaying our facts on our behalf without, so you can get facts pretty quick now, and and it's hard to copyright facts, isn't it? So, but they're never going to replicate. They're never going to replicate. You would hope the sort of experience that a really good, publisher is going to give readers.
I mean, if you look at let's say the Globe, or you look at Washington Post, for example, they're pioneering and they've got great products already. But when you look at smaller titles or more regional titles, they've really got to master three things, I think, and that is visual storytelling, linear storytelling, because the majority of it is going to be on mobile, and you're mobile first. You've got to kind of adopt those three things. If you get the storytelling capability and you think, well, listen, we're not necessarily leading with the headline, we're leading with a picture, and we're not putting one picture, we're putting 20 pictures, and we're using video, we're using a visualization from Flourish to tell a story. And that's really what the kind of Gen Z or digitally native consumer expects. They expect to go into a narrative through a visual medium, and it's much more powerful than being stuck in how we were publishing stories, let's say, even 5 years ago, let alone 10 years ago.
Brilliant. Look, thanks, Chad. I'm going to come back to you, but we've got I think we're going to do questions now. So I don't know if Max, if you want to do the Q&A housekeeping again.
Thank you, Dominic. And thank you, everyone, for this presentation. And just a reminder for the audience, to ask questions, you can send them via the questions widget. Just type them in this box and click submit. Please note that you can still send your questions after the webinar, and they'll be answered at a later date. And now back to Dom to go through the Q&A.
Okay, thanks, everyone. So we've got some questions here. So we've got Jim Schachter, who asks, what's the relationship between Boston.com and the paid Globe website? Does Boston.com drive a meaningful volume of paid subscriptions ultimately, or does Boston.com serve another purpose? Okay,
it serves a number of purposes. I think as I mentioned, when we consciously separated the two sites, the idea was for us to accommodate for maybe two types of audiences. The relationship is very complementary. I think when you're going to the Globe, you're going with a very specific purpose in mind. And Boston.com has tremendous amount of content for a certain type of audience within Boston. So sports, news, weather, they have an incredible loyal audience, things to do, lifestyle, culture, food and drink. People love Boston.com for that. And then they go to Globe to go deeper into regional coverage and other types of content. So the teams are extremely complementary and they work very well together. And BDC does drive a healthy number of paid subscriptions to the Globe as well.
Okay. Got a question here from Nini Diana. If there was a 10 times conversion on the trial, so we're talking about your $1 for 6 months trial, how do you think about long-term value in that equation? Are you assuming it would take a hit? So I guess people often talk about that. They talk about thinking about what's the 3-year value of this, the person we've acquired rather than the immediate. But so is that did you sort of how does that look? How does that look?
Yeah, so when we modeled the LTV for a number of different offers, and ultimately, like I mentioned to you, Dominic, is that what we noticed, the behavior of those that were on the $1 for 6 months, by the end of the 6 months and by the end of the year, they were exhibiting almost the same behavior as those that were not in the on the intro offer. So the retention rates were almost the same as before, but the conversion rate was a lot higher. So when we modeled the LTV, that was the most favorable.
Okay. I got a question here about what paywall strategies. It's quite close to my heart, this, because Press Gazette sort of looking at our paid content strategy, which we've never had before. But paywalls have been around for a while, and I know not everyone likes the term paywall. You might call it something else, but what have you? And I'll ask both of you this. Maybe I'll start with you, Kayvan, and then Chad. What have you found that works in terms of your paywall? So it's a question about what is it a hard and fast? Do you get people to register first, or do you offer them? Do you have a metered approach where you offer them a few articles, or do you tailor it according to the individual? What do you think, Kayvan? And then I'll ask you, Chad, as well.
Yeah, so we started with a hard paywall, Dominic, and then we moved to a metered model, 30 days, 10 free articles, and sometimes we lengthened that to 45 days. Initially, we built our own infrastructure to allow us to do that, because I think most pubs were on a calendar model where essentially would refresh at the first day of the month. But as time's gone on, we dynamically hardened it to one free article every 90 days. So that's a very, very hard paywall, one free article every 90 days. And actually, what we do is we look at the attributes of the user, so geography, browser, time of day, and sometimes we actually just completely harden the paywall where there's no one free article. Now, that's worked for us. We probably have one of the hardest paywalls in the country, but it's served us well because we also have some of the highest subscription numbers in the country as well.
And I guess the flip side of it is, although you got a hard paywall, you've got a pretty generous trial offer, which for just $1 people can come in and they can try everything out.
So yeah, we exactly. And also what I would say is as well is that, sorry, you're right, Dominic.
I hit the nail on the head. Thank you. That's right. Chad, what do you think, Chad, in terms of what you're seeing that works? And I guess probably slightly different question for you, because you might be, the Boston Globe's been at this for a while, but someone who's coming at it straight out the gates might take a slightly different approach. But what do you think?
Yeah, I'll answer this in two parts, if that's okay. If you're coming at it straight out of the gate, I think the most important thing you can do is create a funnel. By far and away, the most important thing you can do is look at your readership and say, how many of my readers are anonymous, as in I don't know anything about them, and then when they leave, I don't know anything about them. How many of them have I identified? How many of them are paying in some way, shape, or form? How many of them are subscribing, and how many of them post-subscription are willing to pay a little bit more? Once you've established that funnel, then you can set yourself some goals and some objectives in terms as a business, wrap yourself around it. I would say if you're out of the gate, that's probably the most important thing that you would need to do. And by all means, experiment with all those things: metering, hard paywalls, soft paywalls, contributions. But the one I want to give to it's a case study I want to share with you to a more mature publisher, and that's a publisher that we work with in India, and they saw a 1,000% increase on their monthly revenues in less than 6 months. And there are some key things that they did, some key changes that they did, and this is not a new publisher to reader revenue. They've been doing it for over a decade, and they're a serious news organization. The first change that they did is they decided to make a bundled offer with another news publisher. Okay, so immediately this other news publisher gave them reach. It was about 4 times their size. So immediately they fixed the problem of reach, and they didn't change anything. They just reached more readers. What their bundled partner got was this high quality. So if you find the right partner where you can merge quality and reach, that was the first change that they made. The second change is what they decided to do was fundraise for investigative journalism. And it was the year of the Indian election, as I said, this year. So readers are interested in politicians, policies, ties to various things, all sorts of things. And they decided, if you can imagine crowdfunding a story, that's kind of what you need to have in your mind. And they were asking readers to say, listen, if you're interested in this, we're fundraising to a certain amount, and then we're going to jump in and we're going to write this article. And it was open to subscribers and non-subscribers. Once the article's been written, the article gets shared with the contributors 2 weeks before it gets released to, to subscribers or anybody else. If you've contributed towards that story, you get it 2 weeks in advance. Right, now, the results were, if you imagine a baseline of February being a normal month they would do their revenues, similar to the previous 12 months, in March, they did 150%. In April, they were at 300% of what they were doing in February. By May, it was 600%, and the Indian election closes in June. By June, they'd done 1,000% of what they were normally doing in February. Phenomenal set of results. And it kind of highlights a couple of things that if you can bundle, if you can directly fund content and stories around big events, and you take a reader-centric approach, you can get fairly phenomenal results. I'm trying to explain this in a way whereby if you were in the US and you had a trusted news source and you said, we want you to investigate what's happening on the southern border, people would contribute. If you said, I want you to investigate what's happening in Western North Carolina, people would contribute. Because news, or local news, even hyper-local news, is amongst the most trusted news, trusted content that's on the internet. So we're much more trusted than social. And then if you take that direct approach, say, listen, fund journalism directly, you might get some really interesting results.
Fantastic. Sounds like they've cracked it. Brilliant. Look, thanks, Chad. I'm conscious that time's marching on and that Kayvan's probably got important stuff to do, get some more revenue in for the Boston Globe before Q4 finishes. So I'm going to go back to you, Kayvan, and let you have the final word. And it's not an easy question, but what's the biggest bit of advice you'd give to a local publisher? Maybe someone who's less further down the journey than you guys, or someone who's maybe a lot smaller and is struggling a bit and trying to make this transition. I mean, what's the main bit of advice you'd give them in terms of turning the ship around?
Yeah, so I think so. Look, we still publish print 7 days a week. We haven't, in a lot of ways, look, we try not to separate print versus digital. We try and think about it as we offer high quality journalism, and then we're offering it in whichever format that our subscribers want it. And so that's part one, which, maybe other people are thinking about print in a different way. But when we think about print, even though we're charging consistently higher prices for print, but if there's an appetite for it, we would always want to keep providing print. At the same time, what we've done successfully is that we've activated 80% of our print subscribers with a digital account, which helps so that if at one point they do decide to cancel their print subscription, they already have their digital account opened. Actually, like the folks who are reading our print paper seven days a week are engaging highly on digital, so I think that's part one, activate their accounts on digital and get them at least up and running on that side. The other thing I would say is we did a lot of complex testing, which ultimately brought us back round to the simplicity of what we were offering. Create a great product, allow audiences to sample it, create a seamless way for them to trial the product, and then repeat that as much as possible. Like, the idea is to keep things simple and keep the offering very simple as well. And I think sometimes when we see with publishers, there's a lot of like quasi benefits and complicated offerings, but keep the offer as simple as possible, and keep the mindset of having a great product as simple as possible.
Thank you, Kayvan. I'm going to stick one more question in actually for you both, because it would be remiss of me not to, as we get towards the end of the year and we're always thinking towards next year. But what's the just give us one big, if you can, one big thing to think about or focus on for next year in terms of the waves of disruption that are coming our way. Give a quick one for you, Chad, and then a quick one to you, Kayvan, and then we'll wrap up. So, Chad, what's one thing that you think publishers should be thinking about for next year in terms of sort of future trends and future disruption?
So, one bit of advice: try bundling if you haven't done it. If you're a small publication, and you should try bundling. The other bit of advice I think is look at your product, try and make it as reader-centric as possible. And try and build content for digitally native readers. They're hardwired to consume content in a certain way. You've got to make sure your product is delivering on that particular message.
Okay. Kayvan, you have the final word, just in terms of the future outlook.
I think it would be remiss not to look at the pros in this space, the Netflixes and Disney Pluses of this world, and I think everything from account sharing to family plans to, as Chad said, thinking about bundling. I think those are key areas. If you're in the reader revenue space, those are key areas to look at for next year.
Brilliant. Listen, thanks for being so generous with your time, Kayvan. We really appreciate it. We wish you well. We learned so much. It's been awesome. Thanks, Chad, for joining us. Well, thanks for everyone who's joined us on the internet. Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Dominic. Cheers, Chad. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So that brings us to the end of our Q&A session and webinar. I'd like to express my heartfelt thanks to Chad, Dominic, and Kayvan for their outstanding presentations, and to our sponsor Quintype for making this session possible. To all of our attendees, please keep an eye on your email for instructions on accessing the on-demand version of this webinar, and you can also find it on our website at www.pmi-live.com. Once again, thank you for joining us today, and I wish you all a wonderful day ahead.